Okay, this is Adam House with week 3 of Resisting Fascism in Global History, a 3,000 level college course. My student diary. Again, this diary is not necessarily for public consumption, although I am making it public. It's more about me trying to think through some of the material that I'm covering in this class and kind of organize some of my own thoughts. So, if you get something out of it, great. If not, that's okay too. I'm not hurt. My feelings are not hurt if you don't watch my video. All right. So, week 3 of Resisting Fascism. The text that I read this week was this book by Laura Lee. There we go. It's called A Moment of War. I was able to get through this book in about I read it over the course of 2 days in about 2 or 3 different settings. You could definitely read this book in one day. So, so why don't I go ahead and talk about what I got out of the book a little bit first. And I've got some of my highlights and notes here, so it'll be easy for me to go through. All right, so first of all, this book was published in 2015. No, that's the latest print. Oh, original copyright 1991. And this book, written by Lori Lee, is supposedly a true story. So here are the contents. That's the chapters. Returned and welcome, Figaro's Castle. All right. That's the contents. Return and welcome. Oh, so one of the things that I like about this book is that there's some very poetic sections to it. It's not written in poetic form necessarily, and but the author is just a really great writer. Honestly, this book is a really good read. But this phrase stuck out to me. The line here says, "I was back in Spain with a winter of war before me." I mean, it's just, it's good stuff like that. Kind of poetic like that all the way through. Waiting and forgetting being just another part of the war. So this is talking about the Spanish Civil War and the character's experience as someone who went to volunteer to fight against the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. Let's see, a deserter, talking about a deserter. He says, in one point, I was trying to get into the war, and he was trying to get out of it. And here we were, stuffed into the same black hole. So this character gets thrown down into a hole, and they throw somebody else down in the hole with him. I won't get into the whole backstory of what was going on necessarily, but anyway, that's the way what he had to say about who he was with in the hole. A plateau of scattered rock and thorn, a few bent bushes, and the wide winter sky closing in. Yeah, this is more just kind of stuff that I like, a well-turned phrase. As soon as we collect a convoy together, we pass you away. But he's talking, in that context, he was talking about I believe it was the silently shot to his feet. Okay, well, I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, let's see what else I've got marked here. Find a good section of this. Chapter 3, I think this is. He's talking about his experiences with his buddies, and that he says we had discovered a new Satan, fascism. these are people that came to know fascism in its first iterations. These were some of the first people who experienced fascism, and so they were looking for ways to define it. They were looking for ways to understand it. So that's what that's really about. He's say this is this old character Satan. This is like a this is what fascism is now, is our new Satan. It's evil, it's horrible. uh, let's see, what else do we have? He's talking about a person he met. He says this guy was a ill-favored young Catalan whose pox-pitted cheeks sprouted stubble like a grave in May. This is in a war, again, in a war context where they all know that they might die at any moment. Um, let's see. I don't want to waste too much time in this video just staring at the page. We had yet to learn that sheer idealism. Okay, so now he's in this section. He's talking about as they're going from naive young men who know nothing of war, but think that they want to take part because of whatever their high ideals, want to fight fascism, whatever. But they're coming from the perspective of people who have no firsthand experience with war, and so him and his compatriots, as they're fighting fascism in Spain, and he does begin to learn war. He does begin to experience it and become a veteran of it. He's talking about their enthusiasm, and enthusiasm before they really went into any kind of hot battle. He says we had yet to learn that sheer idealism never stopped the tank. So it's the rude awakenings that come with war. Your rah-rah-ree, kick them in the knee, rah-rah-ras, kick them in the other knee stuff only goes so far when you come up against reality and you're facing a tank. Talking about how cold it was at one point, and he wasn't able to, he experiences these sacrifices, these hard times in his journey of resisting fascism, and his journey of fighting fascism and fascists. And they were so cold and had been so cold for so long. And he says, I don't think there was one among us who wouldn't have burnt a rare church carving, relic of 1,000 years' piety, to have gained himself 5 minutes of warmth. Right? So it's all a cost-benefit analysis, and if you get cold enough, you might not care what you have to throw into the fire to keep warm. So just a reminder of what war can really be. So another place, he says, another person said, I am a poet. He says, I remember him saying, I don't wish to be here. I belong to music and song, not war. So war had, the war that was brought on, which is kind of, it's indicative of fascism. One of the ironies of fascism is that it often does start off as a quote-unquote isolationist and or non-interventionist kind of movement, even a peace movement, quote-unquote, if you will. But as fascism takes hold and it grows, it eventually gets to the point where its nature is war. Its nature is to go towards war. And so even though it may start as a isolationist and non-interventionist type of movement, it eventually, just by its nature, because of what it does to itself and how it has to feed itself, it eventually becomes necessary to have war to continue to sustain it and to keep it healthy. Healthy's kind of not the best word there, but I think you understand what I mean. Okay, so I don't waste too much more time on the book. Anyway, this is just it's a good introduction to uh, what people in the past have had to go through to fight fascism, the lengths that they have gone to fight fascism, and not just the regular traditional or classic accounts, if you want to call them that we think of. You know, like I say, the Nazis are usually the kind of go-to, the first thing you think of when you think of fascism, or maybe some people think of Mussolini and the black shirts and all that first. But this is about Francisco Franco's fascist movement in Spain, and this guy is a resistor. He's actually joining an international brigade. He's coming from another country, and came to Spain because he wanted to fight fascism. He believed so much that it needed to be resisted. There's just another well-turned phrase. So anyway, I highly recommend this book. If you want an interesting story of an early person who resisted fascism in his own time, one of the first fascist movements, and an early resistor with an interesting story, this is a good book right here. All right, so that's Laurie Lee's A Moment of War, and then I'll just go over some of the notes that I did in class. So I don't remember exactly how the question was worded again, but and I'm not going to read to you a lot, but I do want to read this paragraph, or at least paraphrase most of it or something. I said, this is an interesting question that has been on my mind of late. I do think, oh yeah, so the question has something to do with, can you or do you see any parallels in the days before, immediately before and early days of when fascism began to rise? This is not necessarily asking about fascism itself. It's asking about the conditions in that culture, that society, that economy, that government, that country, that region, that any given fascist movement rose out of. We study that, and we look at what were those conditions, and then the question is, do you see any parallels with those preconditions of what fascism was born out of before, matching today's conditions? Can we make those parallels or not? So I said this is an interesting question. I do think similarities exist between pre-World War II conditions and conditions today. I think there's rising authoritarianism that may well manifest similar to mid-20th century fascism. I think one of the events that led to the rise of fascism about a century ago was the Great Depression. And I believe that the 2008 recession here in the United States, usually associated with the bursting of the housing bubble in the market, that this recession has had similar effects in our own time. Now, granted, I don't think that you could say that the recession of 2008 and immediately thereafter was nearly as severe as the Great Depression. You know, if you know a little Depression history, you know things got pretty nasty here for a while. And those of us that come from families that did not have means back in those days, we've heard some of those stories firsthand from some of the people who lived through it. And the Great Depression was it was a hell of a time to be alive and be an American. Or, I mean, that's another thing important to remember here, is that America is not an island unto itself. And I think this is one of the problems that we have in American political culture, um, that we're surrounded by oceans on either side, and then we only share a border with two other countries, one on the north and one on the south. And so we do kind of feel like an island to ourselves a lot. A lot of Americans don't even own a passport and are not interested in even traveling to other countries. And I think that needs to change. I think we need to take a more international interest, and that's better for us here at home in many ways if we take an interest. But also, a lot of these historical events that we think of a lot of times as Americans as being, oh well, when America had the Great Depression in the 1930s. Well, it wasn't just America going through a depression. This was a worldwide issue. Um, but America went through its portion of it, its version of it, and other countries did as well. So anyway, I say that the while the Great Depression was I think much more severe, the Great Recession of 2008 still bears similarities, and it still had some of the same effects. So one of those effects being that it fanned the passions of populism. Um, I can remember when the 2008 housing bubble burst, the market goes bad, and we started into the recession. And we were in a presidential campaign at the time, in an election cycle, and it was George W. Bush was on his way out. He was term limited and done. And coming up behind him in the Republican Party at the time was Vietnam War veteran and former POW John McCain. And so when the housing bubble burst, um, George Bush's administration's answer to it was to bail out the banks, and then it was just kind of downhill from there. And because he had been president for 8 years, he gets blamed for everything, and a lot of people did not like the way that he handled it, what he did with it, including myself. Um, and so there was a populist backlash to that. Now, just to be fair, on the other side of the aisle during that election was the new presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, Barack Obama. And Obama supported bailouts and all this government infusion of money into the markets, just like Bush did. So they're really, you could get off into the weeds and draw differences, but for all intents and purposes, the Republican and Democratic parties both had the same answer. They were ready to throw as much money as they needed to or wanted to at the problem, and hope that they could fix it like that, which, a lot of us uh, uh, monetary and fiscal conservatives thought that this was an irresponsible way to deal with it, and it only ultimately made matters worse. And that was the populist backlash. I consider myself part of that. I didn't like what they did, and I thought we needed to make a major national change in our economic policy and in our politics in general because of it. But because Bush was president and McCain supported what he did, uh, Bush and McCain get blamed for the problem, and Obama gets elected. But there's an immediate backlash from left wing populism, and you get the Occupy Wall Street movement. Now, the Occupy Wall Street movement's going on while Obama is in office. Obama being the first black president elected, these conditions led to the right wing then having a counter backlash to the left wing populist backlash. So now you've got a left wing populist backlash that kind of manifests in Occupy Wall Street and that the movements of that time. And then that's immediately followed by the Tea Party from the right, the populist backlash from the right. And we usually think of that as like the Tea Party and the movements kind of associated with that. And then, in my view, what we've seen since then over the last, over 20 years now, is basically uh, we are becoming more polarized. The left is going further to the left, the right's going further to the right. And in my estimation, I feel like they're both going a little more authoritarian in flavor every time the pendulum swings. So the pendulum swings from the left to the right. It goes more extreme every time and more authoritarian every time as it swings. And it's swung so far left and right so many times now that we're in a situation where we have the MAGA movement in power. The populist right wing backlash is now in power. It actually captured the White House and has a majority in the Congress in both chambers, House and Senate, as well as the Supreme Court and a lot of other lower courts. So anyway, that kind of those conditions, I believe, are what part of led to after the Great Depression, or during the Great and during and after the Great Depression, helped lead to fascism then. And I think the 2008 recession is part of what has led to what we see happening now, what I think is authoritarianism. Both eras are also marked by large migrations and a rise of xenophobic sentiment. Both eras express significant disillusionment with promises of democracy, not quite delivering successfully. Um, and I'm not really puzzled as to whether there are similarities and whether we're seeing an authoritarian movement right now. I think that we definitely are. What I am more interested in more puzzled by, would be what we're seeing now, something that we could lump in with what we classically, traditionally understand as fascism. Um, would it qualify to be put in that category? Or might it possibly be, okay, well, it's similar to the fascism that we've seen before, but it's got a different enough flavor now that maybe it's something, a little different. Maybe what we're seeing today should more accurately or more appropriately be called neo-fascism. I don't know. Or maybe, it's a whole other term. Maybe we need to come up with a whole new term for this type of right wing populist reactionary uh, authoritarianism that we see now. Okay, so yeah, also another similarity after World War One, there tends to be, and not just in the United States, but in many places across the world, there's this rise of an isolationist and non-interventionist feeling. And so people are wanting to avoid war, kind of like at all costs. They've just come out of World War One. They're pretty war weary, and everybody wants to figure out, like, let's figure out how we can get along without doing that again. Well, we all know what happens, right? We do that again, and we get World War II. So it's ironic that one of the focuses of the political culture of that day was to try to avoid war. And so you get isolationist movements like America First and Germany First and all these other fascist movements across the world like that end up eventually kind of morphing and evolving into the movements that took power in the day, and then some of them that didn't, that were not successful. America First here in the United States existed for a while under with Charles Lindbergh and all that, but it all disbanded when America entered World War II. So it kind of got drowned out after that. Um, but following World War One, that was what happened, and I think now, especially in America, we're war weary from the global war on terror, from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So America is in kind of an isolationist, non-interventionist type of mood, and so our political culture is geared very much towards trying to avoid war. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the movement, the flavor that it takes under the certain conditions, um, tends to lead to other things. So, my one of my takeaways from class the other day was that fascism has a complicated history. Um, there are many different factors that contribute to each individual movement. So yes, you can find a lot of similarities to help you, identify what is fascism, but you have to understand that fascism is also very fluid and it can look quite different across its various iterations in different countries and different time periods. Um, let's see. Yeah, okay. So I think that's about all I've got. Uh, question for you today is how do you think, if you saw fascism rising, what do you think would be the appropriate reaction to that? If you not if you're kind of iffy or whatever, if you whatever it is that would convince you that fascism is happening in front of you, if you were to get that evidence, whatever data, whatever, tea leaves, whatever it is that you think that you would need to see to know for a fact that fascism is rising in front of you, what would be the appropriate reaction to that? So that's a little food for thought. Today is September 11th of 2025, and today I celebrated. Celebrated's not the right word. I remembered today, and I paid respects for the sacrifices of those people who have paid the ultimate price to try to keep America safe, and in defending America, and have been the victims of the enemies of America, as people on 9/11 were. And, I was working that day. I won't go into my whole story right now. What happened that day, everybody that lived through it's got one. It's sort of like the JFK thing. Where were you when JFK was assassinated? I wasn't alive yet. But when 9/11 happened, I was already grown with a wife, a baby, and a mortgage, and working a full-time job all the time. And, what I did today was remember, and I also participated, because I am worried about my country right now. I participated in a demonstration, an anti-ICE protest at our local courthouse in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I just want to say, if you, like me, feel that there's rising fascism in America right now, and that has you feeling overwhelmed or discouraged or sad, you're down, whatever it is, let me just tell you that my experience getting out today and protesting in the streets, meeting like-minded people who also feel the need to do this right now, I feel better today afterwards than I have felt about our situation in America in a long time. That's what I'm going to say about it. And maybe it's something you might think about. If you feel that way, maybe you should try it too. So there it is. All right. Until next week, this has been Adam House with Fascism and Global History, Resisting Fascism and Global History, a 3,000 level college course. I will see you next week. Remember, fuck Trump, fuck ICE.